Welcome to Say the Question. I'm Joe, here with Sam, and today we're asking why celebrity activism can feel so persuasive, even when it's not the same thing as expertise. When a famous person steps into a moral or political fight, are we hearing insight or just a very polished megaphone?
Yeah, and that's the awkward part. Fame can make a voice sound more credible than it is. Public health research says celebrity influence is equivocal, which is a polite way of saying it can help or it can get in the way when the advice clashes with evidence.
Right. So the question isn't whether celebrities can move people. They clearly can. The real starting take is whether that attention is useful or just crowding out better judgment. So let's begin with the case for fame as a shortcut to authority. Sam, start us off.
Okay, here's the part that bugs me. Fame seems to buy credibility way too easily. Somebody gets famous for acting, singing, being funny, whatever, and then people start treating them like they've been promoted to moral authority. Like the career itself came with a second diploma nobody else got to see.
The weird part is not that they have opinions. Everybody has opinions. The weird part is how fast the room starts acting like the opinion comes with a badge. People stop hearing a person and start hearing a brand, which is a very different thing.
Right, and I want to separate the obvious thing from the annoying thing. A celebrity can care about a cause, can donate, can speak up, can be sincere. Fine. But sincerity is not expertise, and a platform is not a credential. Those are different jobs, and we keep pretending they're the same because it's easier.
That's the clean version. People keep collapsing those into one category because it feels simpler to say, they care, therefore they're right, or they're famous, therefore they're fake. Both are lazy. One gives away too much credit, the other refuses to give any credit at all.
Exactly. And the fake part is almost funny, because fame acts like this weird costume that makes the same sentence sound deeper. A specialist says something and people go, a celebrity says it, and suddenly the room acts like a lighthouse just got turned on.
That's the pressure point. The sentence didn't necessarily change. The social meaning around the person changed. We hear the voice, but we're also hearing the image we already have in our heads. And that image does a lot of work before the actual claim even lands.
So am I overstating it if I say people basically confuse "I know this face" with "this person should lead the conversation"? Because that feels like the whole scam. It's not even always malicious. It just seems automatic, like the brain takes the shortcut and calls it wisdom.
I'd soften scam unless you're accusing somebody of deliberately faking authority. But the confusion is real. A famous person can get heard faster, can get clipped into a headline faster, can get treated as culturally important faster. That doesn't make them more informed. It just means the machine prefers them.
That's fair. And I'm not saying every celebrity is some empty suit with a cause stapled to it. Some of them actually care. The problem is that the audience keeps rewarding the stage, not the substance. We keep clapping for the fact that somebody can command attention, then acting surprised when attention gets mistaken for authority.
Yes, and that reward changes behavior. If attention is the currency, then the celebrity already owns a bigger pile of it than the specialist. So in public debate, the famous person doesn't just enter the conversation. They can drag the conversation toward them, and suddenly everybody is arguing about the person instead of the issue.
That's what makes people itchy. Because sometimes it's not even that the celebrity's wrong. It's that everybody suddenly pretends their opinion has special gravity just because they can fill a room or trend for a day. Meanwhile, the person who actually knows the subject is standing there like, can I get 2 minutes without the applause machine hijacking the room?
That's the distinction I'd keep. Influence is real, expertise is separate, and charisma is its own thing. People keep wanting one person to do all three jobs. That's convenient, but it's sloppy. A famous person may be useful at getting attention onto a subject, but that's different from being the best person to explain the subject or set the policy tone.
Okay, but that's the part I think people dodge. If a celebrity can move public attention toward a cause, doesn't that give them some kind of real value? I'm not saying they should be ignored. I'm saying people start talking as if visibility itself proves wisdom, and that's where it gets mushy.
It gives them value, just not the value people keep pretending they have. They can amplify, point, persuade, and sometimes make a boring issue visible to people who would otherwise tune out. But useful isn't the same as authoritative. A loud voice can open the door and still not be the person you want explaining what's in the room.
So the real discomfort is that fame isn't just louder. It changes the listener. The same sentence gets upgraded in people's heads because it came from somebody already framed as important. That's what I can't stop noticing. Why does the louder microphone feel like proof?
Exactly. That's the next question. What is fame doing to the listener that makes the same claim feel wiser coming from the famous person?
Okay, but before we get lost in whether celebrities should even talk, I think we should pin down why this bugs people so much. Fame already tells the room to pay attention, and then the same person starts acting like that attention should turn into credibility.
That's the clean starting point. People are not just reacting to one opinion, they're reacting to status getting mixed up with authority. Fame gets you heard, but a lot of listeners can feel the moment it starts being used like proof.
Right, and that is where the suspicion starts to feel like attention laundering. The celebrity stamp makes the message look more serious than it earned, and the whole thing can feel like the loudest voice in the room gets mistaken for the smartest one. And then the awkward part is that people are supposed to applaud because the cause sounds good, while nobody wants to say the quieter truth out loud, that some of the force comes from the person being famous, not from anything especially careful or informed they just said.
And that's the part worth separating. Because, yes, sometimes the audience is rewarding the performance more than the substance. But that still doesn't prove bad faith. It proves people are bad at separating charisma from competence, which is a different problem and, honestly, a more embarrassing one.
So what's the fair version of the complaint? Because I don't want to flatten this into all celebrities are full of it. Some of them might care a lot, but the public still treats the volume of their voice like it came with a special certificate.
The fair version is that fame is a shortcut around the normal burden of proof. Most people have to explain why they should be listened to. A famous person can skip straight to the conclusion and let recognition do half the work, which is annoying even when the conclusion itself is decent.
And people really do resent being managed by somebody who seems insulated from the mess. If you're hearing a rich, admired, very safe person explain what sacrifice should look like, it can sound less like leadership and more like a lecture from the balcony.
That resentment makes sense, especially when the person speaking looks like they won't have to live with the trade-offs in the same way everyone else does. But I'd keep one line bright. Discomfort with insulation is not the same thing as proving the celebrity is dishonest. It just means the audience is asking, why you?
And that's where the whole thing gets weird. Because public support and public leadership are not the same thing. If a celebrity says, I care about this, here's the cause, here's who I think knows more than me, that's one thing. If they slide into acting like the issue now belongs to them, people can feel the move immediately. Joe, am I overstating how fast that switch happens?
No, that's the right distinction. The useful version of celebrity involvement is amplification, not replacement. If they are pointing people toward experts or saying, this matters, listen to the people who actually work on it, that can help. But once the famous person becomes the main event, the signal gets muddy very fast.
Yeah, and audiences are not wrong to be suspicious when the clip circulates because of the face, not because of the argument. We reward the spectacle, then act surprised when spectacle crowds out the people who actually know the subject.
That's the pressure point. Celebrity status can help a cause get seen, but it can also let the famous person borrow seriousness they did not earn in that topic. So the real suspicion is not famous people should shut up. It's, why does fame keep getting mistaken for qualification? Okay, let's clean up the mushy part first, because this is where people start arguing past each other. When we say celebrity activism, we're mixing together at least 4 different things: being famous, having reach, caring about an issue, and claiming some kind of authority about it.
And once those get blended together, everybody starts reacting to a cartoon version of the argument. One loud opinion from a famous person gets treated like it came with a license stamp, which is ridiculous, but also weirdly common.
That's the useful distinction. Celebrity mostly gives you attention, reach, and media interest. It does not automatically give you expertise, and it definitely does not make you a leader just because a lot of people are watching.
So celebrity is basically a megaphone, not a credential. And the problem is that audiences keep hearing the volume and assuming there's wisdom attached to it.
Exactly. A megaphone can still matter a lot, though. If you can reach people other voices can't, you can move attention, shape what gets discussed, and make certain causes harder to ignore. That's real influence, even when the authority behind it is weak.
Right, but that's where it gets slippery. Because once you've moved the conversation, people start treating you like you own the conversation. Joe, am I overstating that? Or is there really a point where being the messenger turns into acting like the decision maker?
No, that's a real line to worry about. A messenger says, "Here's what I think," or "Here's what I'm supporting." A decision maker, or somebody speaking with expertise, is claiming a right to guide the outcome. Those are not the same thing, even if the internet keeps collapsing them together.
And celebrities blur it on purpose sometimes, right? Not always in a sinister way, but because the label is useful. If people already trust you, the statement lands harder. If they don't, you still get the reaction. Either way, you stay in the middle of the frame.
Sure, but I'd separate intent from effect. Some celebrities are speaking as citizens. They have a view, they care, they're using their platform. Others are speaking like brand managers, where the point is less persuasion than image maintenance. And those are very different kinds of public speech.
That's the part people skip. A lot of this isn't really, what is your theory of the issue? It's, what does this do for your image? Which is rude, but not crazy to ask, because the incentives are sitting right there on the table.
No, it's not crazy. It just shouldn't be turned into a universal accusation. Sometimes the answer is sincere. Sometimes it's strategic. And sometimes it's both. Public life does that weird thing where conviction and self-protection can occupy the same sentence.
And expertise is the other thing people keep dragging into the room like it belongs there. Being good at performing, selling, or building a persona does not mean you know the policy, the history, or the trade-offs. That's where the whole thing gets dishonest if nobody says it out loud.
That's the key separation. Expertise is about knowledge and judgment in a specific area. Activism is about taking a public position and trying to move people or institutions. Leadership is about people following you, whether formally or informally. A person can have one of those, all three, or almost none of them.
So the fair version is, celebrity can amplify activism, but it does not magically convert activism into expertise or leadership. It can make somebody louder, more visible, more bankable, and more annoying, but not automatically more right. That's the distinction everybody wants to skip because it's less flattering.
That's the line. Fame gives you a bigger microphone, not a better argument. And once we keep those terms separate, the next question gets a lot cleaner. When does that microphone help? And when does it start crowding out the people who know what they're talking about?
Okay, now that the definition part is out of the way, the clean split is this. Are celebrities useful because they drag attention toward neglected stuff? Or are they a problem because the loudest person in the room starts setting the terms for everybody else?
The best argument for them is pretty basic. Some causes do not get heard unless somebody with reach makes them annoying to ignore. And a famous person can move a conversation from never heard of it to fine, I guess we should look at it.
And the best argument against them is just as basic. Once the famous person shows up, people stop asking whether the issue is real and start asking whether the celebrity is sincere, hypocritical, fashionable, or currently embarrassing. The cause becomes part of the celebrity's brand.
That distortion is real. Public attention is not a clean meritocracy. So, a face people already know can crowd out people who actually understand the issue. And the audience often rewards confidence and familiarity more than competence.
And that is where it gets annoying, because then the celebrity isn't just boosting awareness, they're suddenly the reason everyone is supposed to care. The issue gets dragged into their orbit, and the whole thing starts feeling like a loyalty test.
If the orbit reaches people who would otherwise never notice the issue, I still think that counts for something.
It counts for something, but am I overstating it if I say that people confuse reach with authority? Because that feels like the core cultural bug. If enough people clap, the famous person starts sounding qualified whether or not they are.
No, that's the fair version of the complaint. The useful version of celebrity activism is, I can help point attention somewhere, not I personally am the expert. And the moment those get fused together, it gets sloppy fast.
And that sloppiness has incentives behind it. It is easier to sell a cause when the pitch is attached to somebody already famous. And it is easier for the audience to feel morally covered if they can just buy into the brand instead of doing any actual thinking.
That's the part I would keep. The motive is not always cynical, but the structure rewards surface-level engagement. And that means the same gesture can be generous, annoying, and self-serving all at once.
So where do you draw the line then? When does helping amplify stop being helpful and start being a fame-shaped shortcut that crowds out the people who are already doing the unglamorous work?
I think the line is whether the celebrity is directing attention outward or pulling it back toward themselves. If they are connecting people to better voices, clearer facts, and actual expertise, that's one thing. If the conversation only survives because the celebrity is in it, that's a warning sign.
That's the useful distinction, but it still leaves the uncomfortable part untouched. The public often wants the famous version more than the accurate version.
Sure, because fame is a shortcut for attention. That does not make every celebrity move fake, but it does mean the audience is reacting to status before it is reacting to substance.
And once status gets in the room, everything else gets a little warped. People who agree with the celebrity call it brave. People who disagree call it performative. And the actual issue is left sitting there like, hello, can we get back to the thing?
That is the messiest part. The celebrity can lower the entry barrier for the audience, but they can also raise the social cost of disagreeing, because now criticism sounds like you are attacking the person instead of checking the claim.
Yeah, and then everybody starts talking around the issue. Nobody wants to be the person who says, hold on, maybe the best spokesperson is not the person with the biggest following. That sounds rude even when it is obviously true in some cases.
Mostly, yes. But I would still separate best spokesperson from useful amplifier. Those are not the same job, and people keep pretending they are because it makes the conversation easier. The question is whether the celebrity knows the difference and behaves like it.
That might be the whole tension. If they stay in the lane of, I can get eyes on this, maybe that is genuinely useful. If they slide into trust me because I'm famous, now we're in nonsense territory.
Right, and the next question is whether anybody around them is actually checking that boundary, or whether everyone just enjoys the spotlight too much. Because once you start looking at who benefits from the attention, the picture gets a lot less flattering. Okay, let's stop treating this like pure vibes and look at the cases where celebrity attention actually did something. The annoying answer is that sometimes it moves behavior, and sometimes it just makes everybody talk about the famous person.
So the first receipt is that the annoying answer is still annoying. Great. But if you have an actual example where the celebrity didn't just get applause and headlines, I want that one first.
The cleanest one is Katie Couric and colon cancer screening. There was a 2002 observational study that found her televised campaign was followed by a substantial increase in colonoscopy use. That does not prove she caused every bit of that change, but it is a real example of fame being converted into action, not just attention.
Okay, that's actually useful. It means celebrity can lower the temperature around a subject people avoid, or at least shove it onto the table long enough for someone to do the thing.
Right, and that's the part people skip. The celebrity isn't automatically the expert. They're often the megaphone. In that case, the message was concrete, easy to act on, and attached to a preventive health behavior that did not require the audience to treat Couric like a physician.
So where does that stop being useful and start becoming a shortcut? Because the minute a famous person is talking outside their lane, the whole thing can turn into borrowed authority with better hair.
That is the line, yeah. If the ask is simple, well supported, and the celebrity is just helping people notice it, that can be real value. If the claim needs expertise, nuance, or accountability, fame starts to look like a delivery system pretending to be a credential.
And then you get the opposite kind of example. A review in the conservation literature looked at Leonardo DiCaprio's 2016 Oscars climate speech and found that it generated a much bigger burst of news coverage, social posts, and searches than either the 2015 COP meeting or Earth Day. That's attention working exactly as designed. But it also shows how a celebrity can swallow the event. That's the celebrity became the event problem. Everybody pretends they're talking about the issue, but the engine is still the famous face.
Exactly. And the platform side matters too. Pew found that a lot of social media users follow candidates or other political figures. And most of those users mostly follow people who already share their politics. So the system is already tilted toward familiar voices, which is why celebrity or star power travels so well.
So the audience isn't exactly asking for expertise. It's asking for somebody they already recognize to tell them what the vibe is.
Mostly yes. And that's why the public health literature is so mixed on this. One review says celebrity influence on health behavior is equivocal. It can help or hinder depending on whether the advice is valid and applicable. And people can trust celebrities even when the message conflicts with health professionals and evidence. There was even that 2012 BMJ issue, where one piece argued celebrity involvement could have long-term benefits, and the paired counterpoint said no, not so fast.
So the receipts are basically, fame can move people, but it does not magically improve the idea being sold. It can get the message past the gate, or it can just paint the gate in brighter colors.
That's the cleanest version. Sometimes celebrity is a useful shortcut to attention and action. Other times it is just spectacle with a better media strategy. And the annoying part is that both of those can look good in the moment. Which is why the pattern keeps repeating.
Okay, so take the examples one step further. Who actually benefits from keeping this arrangement in place? Because the annoying part isn't just that celebrities talk. It's that the whole machine seems to love it.
That's the cleaner question. The celebrity gets reach, the platform gets engagement, the outlet gets a familiar face, and the audience gets a simple story with a name attached. Nobody has to be a cartoon villain for that to keep happening.
And the celebrity gets to look brave without doing the tedious part, which is usually learning the issue, sitting with the consequences, or being the person who gets blamed when the thing gets messy.
I mean, sometimes they do learn the issue, but your basic point stands. The cost is often weirdly lopsided. A post can be a branding win for them, while the actual burden lands on people who have to deal with the policy, the backlash, or the confusion.
Right, and that lopsidedness is why it keeps working. If the reward is applause and the downside is mostly someone else's problem, you've built a pretty durable habit. Not noble, just durable.
And it's not just a celebrity move. Media and social platforms are built to reward whatever already has attention, which means fame becomes a shortcut to visibility, whether or not the person is especially qualified. Attention is basically the currency, so the loudest familiar face enters the room first.
Look, adults follow lots of creators, influencers, and celebrities, and very few follow politicians, civic people, or traditional journalists. That's not a conspiracy. That's the platform telling you what it likes.
Exactly, and the older Pew work points the same direction. Only about 1/4 of social media users followed political figures, and most of those people were following voices that matched their own views. So the feed is rewarding familiarity and identity as much as it is rewarding any kind of expertise.
Which is the whole game, right? Familiarity feels like wisdom. If someone already has your trust, the platform doesn't need them to be an expert. It just needs them to be recognizable, emotionally legible, and loudly positioned. That is enough for a lot of people to stop asking for the boring credential part.
And that gets at the psychological hook in the public health review. Celebrity messages can stick because they activate trust and memory, and people read credibility or aspiration into the messenger before they've checked the claim. So the messenger starts carrying the argument for them, which is convenient until the messenger is standing in for the actual evidence.
And now the face is doing the work the idea was supposed to do.
Yeah, and that's where the distinction matters. A celebrity can amplify something useful if they're pushing people toward better information or toward a cause that already has serious people attached to it. The problem is when the celebrity becomes the headline and the expert becomes the footnote.
So what's the fair version of the complaint? Because I don't want to pretend every famous person talking about a public issue is automatically garbage. Some of it is just amplification. Some of it is genuinely useful if it points people somewhere better.
That's the useful split. Harmless amplification is when the famous person is basically a loud doorway into better information, better organizations, or people who actually know the subject. The crowded out version is when their status becomes the main event, and the rest of the field has to squeeze itself into the margins to be heard.
And institutions like that too, don't they? A messy issue is easier to package when there's a recognizable face on it. It makes the thing feel cleaner, faster, and more emotionally readable than it probably deserves to be.
Absolutely. The outlet gets a cleaner package, the platform gets the click, the celebrity gets the glow, and the audience gets to feel informed without doing much sorting. That's why this keeps reproducing itself, even when people complain about it. The simple explanation is the platform gives everyone a reward. The deeper one is that the incentives keep pushing people toward the loudest familiar voice.
Okay, so the polite answer is pretty easy. Famous people have a platform, they care about stuff, and they're just using their reach for good. That sounds clean. It also sounds like the kind of answer you give when you don't want to say the awkward part out loud.
The awkward part being that visibility gets treated like competence. People hear a familiar voice, see a polished delivery, and their brain quietly upgrades that into authority. Not because they're stupid, exactly, but because the signal is loud.
Right, and that's the thing that bugs people. The public story is they're using their platform, which is charitable. The rougher story is the platform itself is doing half the work, and nobody wants to admit that because it sounds rude. Joe, is the problem here that the celebrity talks at all, or that people start treating the talking like proof? Because those are not the same complaint.
That's the distinction. The speech itself can be fine, even useful, and still get inflated by the context around it. Once fame is in the room, people stop asking, is this person right? And start asking, why does this feel important?
So the clean version is, they might mean it, and the messy version is, meaning it does not magically make them right. That feels like the first place the polite story gets sloppy. Good intentions get treated like a substitute for competence.
Exactly. Good intentions are morally relevant, but they do not solve the information problem. If someone is sincere and still underinformed, you can respect the sincerity and still think the audience is overtrusting them.
And celebrities are built for overtrust. They're articulate, camera-ready, and usually trained to sound like they know what they're doing. That polished voice gets mistaken for a deeper kind of authority. It's the same old scam, except sometimes nobody thinks it's a scam.
I'd soften scam. Sometimes it's not deception so much as audience projection. People want a leader, a symbol, a shortcut to certainty. A famous person can become that even when they never claimed to be an expert.
Fair, but the shortcut still does real work. If a celebrity says something with confidence, a lot of people don't hear one person's opinion. They hear, this has been vetted by the general aura of importance, which is ridiculous, but very human.
That's the better way to say it. The aura is doing the persuading before the argument even shows up. And once that happens, the actual content can be weak and still travel farther than a more qualified person's careful answer.
And that's where people get themselves twisted up. They hear a polished celebrity message and assume the only choices are to applaud it or be a hater. But you can think, this is a decent instinct. And also, this person is not necessarily the best guide for the topic.
That's the part I would keep. The honest version does not have to be cynical. It just has to separate intent, reach, and expertise. Those are different things, even if the public keeps bundling them together because it makes the story easier.
So when people say, why shouldn't a celebrity speak up? They have a right to an opinion. That's true, but kind of beside the point. The issue is not whether they're allowed to talk, it's whether we've started treating talk as expertise because it came wrapped in fame.
That's the useful distinction. Speaking and being treated as an authority are not the same thing. A celebrity can say something sincere, useful, even brave, without that meaning they should be the person steering the whole conversation.
And to be clear, Sometimes they do help. Sometimes a famous person gets attention on a problem that would otherwise get ignored, and that's real. I just think the polite story uses those good cases to hide how often fame itself is the credential.
Yeah, both things can be true at once. Fame can be a megaphone for a decent point, and it can also crowd out the people who know more. That's why the honest question is not, are celebrities always bad? But when is the platform helping, and when is it substituting for expertise?
That's the pressure point. The lazy version is either worship or total eye roll. They're heroes, or they should shut up. The real answer is more annoying. Sometimes they're adding reach, sometimes they're borrowing credibility, and sometimes the audience can't tell which one is happening.
And that confusion is where all the sloppy takes come from. People either defend the celebrity as if fame makes them wise, or attack them as if speaking publicly is automatically arrogant. The next step is figuring out what everyone keeps missing when they argue past that gap.
Because the gap is the story. Not celebrities are good or celebrities are bad. It's that we keep pretending visibility, charisma, and sincerity are the same as judgment, and then act shocked when the result is a mess.
That's the line. And once you see it, a lot of the polite language stops sounding generous and starts sounding like cover for a very old habit, letting the loudest person in the room set the terms.
Okay, so let's clean up the dumb takes first. All celebrity activism is fake, is lazy, and they raised awareness, so leave them alone, is lazy in the opposite direction. Both versions dodge the real question, which is whether the celebrity is actually useful or just loud.
That's the right split. Attention is not trust, and attention is definitely not expertise. A famous person can make more people notice an issue, but noticing something and knowing what to do about it are different jobs. A celebrity can be a useful introducer. They can get people to look at the issue who would never read a dry policy thread. But if the famous person is treated as the source of truth, now you're...
Exactly. They can open the door, but people start acting like they built the house.
And that's where the awareness defense gets slippery. Awareness is a step, not a finish line. If all you did was create a moment where everyone feels informed and morally satisfied, but nobody got better information or a real path to act, then you mostly produced a vibe.
So what's the fair version of the criticism then? Because I do think people use "you're just being cynical" as a shield whenever they don't want to admit the celebrity is overstepping.
The fair criticism is not famous people should shut up. It's famous people should know when they're a messenger and when they're pretending to be the expert. Those are different. If they're just getting the message in front of more eyes, fine. If they're using their status to crowd out the people who actually know the thing, that's where the problem starts.
And the lazy anti-celebrity take misses that the same person can be useful in one context and useless in another. Somebody might be a decent amplifier on one issue and a total disaster on another. That doesn't make them a fraud everywhere. It just means fame is a weird credential.
That's the cleaner standard people keep skipping. Don't ask, do I like this celebrity? Ask, are they adding information or just adding volume? If they're adding volume without adding anything else, that's not expertise. That's just noise with better lighting.
Where would you draw the line, though? Because there's a middle case where the celebrity isn't claiming to be an expert, but the whole machine around them starts treating their opinion like a fact because they said it with confidence.
That's the problem. Confidence gets mistaken for competence way too easily, especially when somebody is already famous. If they're introducing an issue and then stepping back so the actual people can speak, that's one thing. If they're filling the space so completely that nobody else gets heard, then the celebrity status is doing the work that evidence should be doing.
And that's the part I think people miss when they get smug about it. It's not that every appearance is fake, and it's not that every famous cause is noble. The actual test is whether the celebrity is helping people understand something better or just giving them a more flattering way to feel informed.
Right. If you can't point to the new information they added, you may just be reacting to the volume of the performance. And once that happens, curiosity turns into a story you're telling yourself. Okay, before we keep pushing on motives, we should put a break on this. We can be skeptical without pretending we can read somebody's private brain from a public post.
Fine. Because this is the point where people get weird and start talking like they solved the case because a famous person posted something with a careful caption and a serious photo.
Right. And that's the boundary worth protecting. We can talk about what they said, who heard it, whether it seemed calculated, and what incentives were around it. We cannot jump from that to, therefore, this was a secret manipulation campaign, unless we actually have evidence for that leap.
So the fair version is observable behavior on one side, imagined motive on the other.
Exactly. Celebrity commentary tempts people into skipping the middle step because the person already comes with a story attached. You know the brand, you know the vibe, you know the era they belong to in your head, and suddenly that story starts pretending to be proof.
Which is very online behavior. People hear a public statement and immediately start filling in the whole emotional screenplay around it.
And not just online. Anytime a famous person says something political or moral, half the audience hears the sentence and the other half hears everything they already think about that person. The actual words get buried under projection pretty fast.
Okay, but that still leaves the annoying part. Sometimes the statement really does feel staged or self-protective. So where's the line between this is sleazy and I know exactly what they meant?
The line is usually simpler than people want it to be. If you want the fairer version, you say, this looks polished, self-serving, or strategically timed, and I don't trust it. That's a criticism of packaging and timing. They secretly meant to manipulate everyone is a much bigger claim.
So no mystical decoder ring, just a bad feeling and some actual behavior to point at.
Pretty much. And the bad feeling isn't nothing. It may tell you the message feels over-rehearsed, or the timing is convenient, or the audience is being nudged in a direction. That's real enough to discuss. It just stops being useful the second you start claiming hidden intent, like you've proved it.
So if I say, this looks like they're using fame to pressure people, that's fair. If I say they built a whole covert operation to fool everyone, I'm probably past the evidence.
That's the useful distinction. Incentives are visible all the time. Intent isn't. A public figure has reasons to protect their image, sell something, rally support, or avoid backlash. You can talk about those incentives without pretending you know every thought in their head.
And celebrity status makes people more likely to project their own politics onto the person too. They stop asking, what did that statement actually say? And start asking, what do I want this person to represent for me?
Yes, and that cuts both ways. If you admire the celebrity, you may read every statement as brave and meaningful. If you hate them, you may read the same sentence as proof of something darker. Either way, the public figure becomes a screen for other people's stories.
That's the part I think people dodge. They want the comfort of certainty because I feel off about this sounds weaker than I know what they were really doing.
And certainty is easier to spread than honesty. Honesty usually sounds more like, this feels packaged. I don't like the effect, and I can't prove the motive. That's less dramatic, but it's the version that survives contact with reality.
So the rule is call the behavior, not the secret soul behind it. If somebody's using fame to push a message, say that. If they're just saying something you hate, don't invent a hidden master plan because you're annoyed.
Exactly. Fair skepticism asks what happened, what the effect was, and who might benefit. Mind reading asks you to pretend you have access to intent you do not actually have. If we keep that line clear, the next question gets more honest. When does celebrity influence actually help? And when does it crowd out the people who know what they're talking about?
Okay, so the next question is the actual line drawing one. When is a celebrity helping, and when are they just making the whole thing louder in a way that feels important but doesn't really do much? Because those are not the same thing, and people keep acting like fame automatically turns into wisdom.
That's the right place to land. If the celebrity is widening the audience for something real, that can be useful. If they're replacing people who know the issue with a famous face, then the fame becomes the point. And now you've got a problem instead of a boost.
So the clean version is public support versus public leadership. I can live with, I care about this, and here are the people who actually know what they're talking about. I start rolling my eyes when it turns into, and because I'm famous, my take should outrank everybody else's.
Exactly. Support is not the same thing as authority. And people smudge those together because it sounds generous. A celebrity can bring attention, money, pressure, maybe even a room that otherwise wouldn't exist. But once they start speaking as if fame itself made them qualified, the whole thing gets shaky.
And that's where people get touchy, because they hear "don't talk over experts" and think you're saying celebrities should shut up forever and never care about anything.
No, not shut up. Just don't confuse concern with competence.
Right. That's the whole distinction. You can use your platform without borrowing credibility you don't have. And honestly, that should be the easy version. Amplify the thing. Don't pretend to be the thing.
That's a good way to put it. If they're adding reach, resources, or pressure, and then pointing people toward affected people and specialists, great. If they're taking up all the oxygen, speaking over the people closest to it, or making the issue feel like a referendum on their own brand, that's where help turns into crowding.
So where would you draw the actual line? Because crowding can get vague fast, and vague lines are where people hide the sloppy version of their argument. What makes celebrity involvement fair, and what makes it start pushing the important voices out of the room?
I'd draw it at role, not motive. If they are adding reach, resources, or emotional energy without pretending to be the specialist, that's usually fine. If they are becoming the center of gravity, if the conversation is mainly about their opinion, their bravery, their post, their feud, their feelings, then the issue has started serving the fame instead of the other way around.
That's annoyingly fair. It means the same famous person can be useful in one mode and obnoxious in another, depending on what role they're actually playing. So the standard is not, are celebrities good or bad? It's, what are they doing with the attention they already have?
Yeah, and that attention has to answer to something besides vibes. If they are pointing people toward better information, better organizers, or better action, fine. If they are just making the conversation more about them because everyone in the room knows their name, then the fame is eating the issue.
And to be fair, that can happen without bad intent. Somebody may think they're helping because they care loudly, but caring loudly is not the same as helping well. Sometimes the most generous thing a famous person can do is make the opening statement and then step back.
Sure, motive matters, but it isn't the whole test. The practical question is whether their involvement helps the cause or turns into a performance of being the person with the hottest take. If the room leaves knowing more about them than about the issue, they've gone too far.
That's the usable rule then. Fame can open the door, but it doesn't become evidence just because it got there first. Be the megaphone if that's the job. Don't become the crown.
Exactly. Use the attention to get people in the room, then hand the microphone to the people who actually know the thing. If celebrity status is the bridge, fine. If it's pretending to be the destination, that's where the line is.
Okay, so if we land this thing cleanly, the final version is pretty simple. Celebrity attention can help a cause, but fame is not expertise, and it is definitely not moral clearance.
That's the distinction. Celebrity can be amplification, sometimes even useful amplification. But people keep sliding from they can get attention to they should be treated like an authority. And that's where the whole thing gets sloppy.
So the question is whether they're adding reach or pretending to add answers.
Yeah. If they help a real issue get seen, fine. If they start acting like their fame makes them the most informed person in the room, that's where it wobbles.
And audiences are kind of addicted to that wobble. A famous person says something with confidence, and people hear certainty where there may just be branding, instinct, or a very polished public posture.
That is the uncomfortable part. Celebrity can make a cause harder to ignore, and sometimes that helps in a very real way. But it can also turn a complicated issue into a personality contest, which is not exactly a victory for clarity.
So would you say the mistake is thinking fame creates trust? Or is it more that people confuse being visible with being right?
Both, honestly. Visibility can be useful evidence that people are paying attention, but it is not evidence that the person knows more than anyone else. And trust is supposed to come from judgment, consistency, competence, all the boring stuff that does not fit neatly on a poster.
Right. And the annoying part is that celebrity makes the whole thing feel more settled than it is. The public sees the polished version and assumes the hard thinking already happened off camera. Sometimes it did. Sometimes it absolutely did not.
Exactly. That is why the healthier move is not never listen to celebrities and not listen to them because they're famous. It's listen to the claim, then decide what kind of claim it is. Is this a recommendation, a personal preference, a donation, a signal boost, or a demand that everyone else treat them like the adult in the room? Those are not the same thing.
And that separation matters because people blur it on purpose when it suits them. If they're right, they want credit for courage. If they're wrong, they want the softness of I'm just raising awareness. That's a very convenient halo to stand under.
That is the pressure point. But to be fair, audiences help create that halo too. We reward certainty. We reward performance. And then we act shocked when somebody with a massive platform starts speaking like the platform itself is proof.
So the listener rule is probably boring, which is usually a good sign. Be open to celebrity usefulness, but keep a hand on the wheel. If a famous person is helping a cause, great. If they're trying to substitute themselves for expertise, leadership, or accountability, that's where the alarm bell should go off.
That's the clean version. Skeptical, not cynical. You do not need to pretend fame is useless, and you do not need to pretend fame is wisdom. Use the attention when it helps, ignore the costume when it doesn't, and don't let anyone turn reach into virtue by default.
Yeah, that feels like the actual answer. Celebrity can open a door, but it cannot walk through it for you. And it definitely shouldn't get to decide that opening the door means it owns the building.
That's a good place to land. Fame can get the microphone, but it doesn't get to outrank reality. So, that's the end of this one. Thanks for joining us on Say the Question. Subscribe or follow, and we'll be back tomorrow.